So now we've officially started. I'll actually start with introductions. So we'll start with Orchid Network Langley Well Center staff that are here, and then we will have Monica introduce herself, and then we will do the poll. So I'm Katie Watkins, and I manage the Well Center. I've seen a lot of your faces before. Cindy, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, I wasn't expecting that. Hi, everybody. It's so good to meet all of you guys. My name is Cindy, and I'm brand new assistant at the Langley Well Center. And I've heard so many wonderful stories about each and every one of you, and I'm so glad to see you tonight.
Thank you. Other Cindy? We have two Cindys now.
Hi, everyone. I'm the other Cindy. I do education programs at Orchid Network, and it's great to see all of you. Great to be back with our youth Zooms. Thanks for being here.
Who else do I got in here? And Katie K.
Hi, everyone. I'm also from Orchid Network, and I'm the development coordinator, and I love all of the wonderful events that we do at the Langley Whale Center, and I'm just really excited to be here and learn with you.
And there is one important thing that I forgot that some of you, if you've been here before, you will remember. We do have a special visitor today. You'll be needing to look out for our friend Ollie. He is an octopus. And yes, Lily and Clara and Will are already doing it. So if you see Ollie, you're going to go ahead and make the diving signal for octopus, which goes just like this. I think I'm a little blurry. But look at Lily and Clara and Willa. They know how to do it. They're pros. All right, and he will be hidden somewhere in the presentation today. And I'm actually going to launch the poll first, and then I will have Monica introduce herself. So real quick, there's just a couple questions about where you're from. We're just curious where people are coming from today. Does everybody see it? Thumbs up. All right. And then we have a pre-presentation question to see if any of you already know a little bit about the Northern Residents. Lots of Washington State coming in. And if you are not from any of the places on the list, you can go ahead and put where you're from in the chat. You guys are so clever. We can't trick you.
I will say, though, that Northern residents probably haven't tried macaroni and cheese. So it could be their favorite if they had the chance.
That is very true. We haven't tested that theory. Good point, Monica.
Just a question. It says 1 of 4 answered on my thing, and I'm pressing submit, but it's not submitting.
Scroll down because there should be 4 questions.
Oh,
there's a scroll button on the right. Yeah, good question though. Ooh, we've got somebody from British Columbia. That is awesome. Okay. Everybody ready? Did we get y'all in, or raise your thumbs up? Put your thumbs up if you're all done and you're ready. Nathan, do you need another minute? All right, you're good.
Oh, you're muted, Katie.
There we go. Thank you. We have, looks like the results are, we have 10 of us are from Washington State, 1 of us visiting from California. We have 1 in British Columbia, 1 from either Idaho, Montana, or Wyoming. I'm kind of curious which it is. We have 1 from East Coast. I think I can guess who that is. And an other, which I think that was the British Columbia. We have 4 of us that are from Whidbey Island. Oh, and somebody from Illinois, I see. Oh my goodness. And Anacortes. and the Whatcom County area, and 3 from Seattle. Wow, this might be our like farthest reaching Zoom that we have had. That's awesome. And most of you, this is your first event. That's very cool. And you guys almost all of you guessed it, that it was salmon, but I think Monica was right that it's fair to assume that if they tried mac and cheese, they might like that the best. Okay, thanks everybody. Now I will hand the floor over to Monica Whalen Shields, who's from the Orca Behavior Institute, and she's going to teach us all about the northern resident killer whales.
Hi, everyone. I'm Monica. I'm really excited to be here because I just got to learn a lot more about northern resident killer whales this year. And so I'm excited to share all of that with you. And before I get into my presentation, I wanted to start by sharing a video with you of some of the northern residents that we saw this summer. So let's start with that. So those guys are pretty awesome. If you haven't seen them before, hopefully that gets you excited to learn a little bit more about them. I'm just going to switch here to sharing my slide presentation. All right, you guys seeing that okay? Yes, good. So, I work with the Orca Behavior Institute, and I'm a whale biologist, so I'm lucky enough to get to study whales. And mostly I'm here where I live on San Juan Island on kind of the northwest corner of Washington State. And I get to see 2 populations of orcas here, southern resident killer whales and Biggs killer whales. But this year I got to take a trip up north into British Columbia, Canada, and meet the northern resident killer whales. And so that's what we're going to do today, is meet this different population of whales that lives just a little bit further north. But let's start with killer whales in general. I'll probably say both killer whales and orcas. They're just 2 different names for the same thing. And so it really doesn't matter which one that you use. But they live all throughout the world, in every single ocean of the world. So just like humans live on every continent, whales live in every ocean. They're one of the most widely distributed animals that we have on our planet. And everywhere you find them, they're in these unique populations that specialize to feed on whatever's available in that particular area. So this second poster here that shows all these different orcas, you know, at first glance, they all look kind of the same. They're all black and white. They all have a big, tall dorsal fin on their back and a white eye patch. But if you look closely, there's some, you know, subtle differences between the different whales. And these are drawings of what whales from these different populations look like. So some are more gray or almost brown in color rather than pure black. Some are bigger or a little bit smaller than others. And some of them have, you know, different size eye patches or slightly different markings. And so even though we call them all orcas, there's all these different populations of orcas all around the world. So let's kind of narrow down to how we get to the northern resident killer whales. Well, all orcas are mammals, just like you and I are mammals. So that means that they breathe air. They come up to the surface of the water in order to breathe. They give birth to live young, just like humans do. And believe it or not, just like all mammals, they actually have some hair You don't really ever see it, but when they're born, they have a couple hairs that are right along their nose, and those eventually fall out, but it's kind of showing their ancestry as being part of all the other mammals in the world. So then we go one step further, and they're part of a group of animals that's called cetaceans. And this includes all the whales, dolphins, and porpoises that are found all over the world. So everything from a blue whale to a harbor porpoise is considered a cetacean. But within cetaceans, they're divided into two types of whales. There's the baleen whales that don't have teeth and are filter feeders. So they're things like humpback whales and gray whales. But then there's toothed whales, which includes everything from sperm whales and belugas to species like killer whales. Again, one step down, within all the toothed whales, there's a group called dolphins, and orcas are the largest member of the dolphin family. So you might be familiar with bottlenose dolphins if you've seen the movie Flipper. They're part of the dolphin family just like orcas, but orcas are the largest dolphin. Then finally, we get to orcas themselves, and that's the species that we're going to be talking about that lives all around the world. But like I said, there's these different groups everywhere that you find them, and these are called ecotypes. So it's all considered members of the same species, but everywhere you find them in the world, there are these different ecotypes. And then within some of these ecotypes, we have specific populations. So we're going to talk today specifically about resident killer whales, which is the ecotype, and northern resident killer whales, which is the specific population. But if you're here, you probably already think orcas are cool, but I thought it was worth talking for a moment about why we are even interested in studying orcas in the first place. And there's a lot of reasons, but here's a couple of my favorite. One is just that they're really big, impressive animals. They're cool to look at. They can be up to 30 feet long. They're impressively marked in black and white, and they have these really striking tall dorsal fins. So they're just a very charismatic animal that we just innately want to hear more about. But they also live in family groups, and they have these lifelong bonds with their family members, just like humans do. And so even though they live in this completely different world, there's a lot of similarities between the relationships that they have with their mothers and their brothers and sisters, and to the way that we live. And so that's another reason that it's interesting to study them. They're also super playful, which means they're exciting to watch. So not only are they impressive when they just come to the surface to breathe, but they also jump out of the water in a behavior we call breaching. They spy hop, where they lift their heads out of the water to see what's going on above the surface. They slap their tails and the fins on the water. And so you never really know what you're going to see them doing. They're super fascinating because they live underwater. So we know that they're very smart and they're very social, but they're living in a world that's completely foreign to us. So it's dark underwater, it's cold, and they have to have all these different adaptations in order to live in that world. And so that means they use sound a lot to communicate. And they have to, have a completely different way of moving through their environment, and of, finding and catching their food, and of communicating with one another than we do as humans. They also travel really long distances. So while they stay in their specific region of the world, so, a whale from Alaska won't show up in Antarctica or anything like that, they can travel up to 100 miles in a single day. So imagine swimming 100 miles in one day. And that's something that these whales do regularly. Even the little babies are expected to keep up right from the beginning. So it's really interesting to follow where they travel and see where they show up. And finally, they do all kinds of unique behaviors, and every population has different behaviors that they do that make them unique and separate from all the other orca populations in the world. And so we'll talk a little bit about that with the northern residents. So ecotype is the resident killer whale. And what makes them all part of the same ecotype is that they're all fish eaters. So they're mainly going after salmon, mostly Chinook salmon. And that's what makes all resident killer whales the same as one another. But this is a map showing all the North Pacific Ocean where resident killer whale ecotype lives. There's a picture of a whale here on the left that has one of those Chinook salmon in their mouth, so that's what they're after. And they're called residents because they tend to be resident to an area where these salmon return to the rivers. So wherever there's these big rivers coming down from the land where the salmon go out and return to spawn, that's where these resident whales tend to make their living because they can find all these fish when they're coming back to their home rivers. But throughout the whole Pacific Ocean, there's these different populations within resident killer whales. So in the United States, especially off the coasts of Oregon, Washington, and California, we have the southern resident killer whales that you might be most familiar with, J-pod, K-pod, and L-pod. You go a little bit further north, and overlapping with the southern residents are the northern resident killer whales. They sometimes come into Washington, but they spend a lot of time in British Columbia and sometimes going up into Alaska. You keep going further north, and then you get the Alaskan resident killer whales that roam all throughout Alaskan waters, and keep going across the Pacific, and you get the Kamchatka resident killer whales, which live over in Russia. So they all look kind of similar to each other, but they live in their own specific regions and are all slightly different. So the northern residents and the southern residents are the ones that, we can see here in Washington state. And what's the same about them is they all eat fish. They all live in family groups called pods, and they all look pretty similar to one another. So while orcas elsewhere in the world have some of these differences in their color or their markings, all the resident killer whales look pretty much the same. But what's different about them is, first of all, they live kind of in different places. They also speak different languages from one another, and they have some of those special behaviors or cultures that makes them unique from one another. So while they're happy to coexist and share some of the same waters, they don't come into contact with one another very often. And even when they do, they don't really recognize one another because they're speaking different languages. And so they just kind of swim past each other and don't spend time together and socialize. So here is a map at the bottom. You can kind of see this black line is the border between Washington state and British Columbia. And I spend most of my time down here in Washington waters with southern resident killer whales. But this year we got to make this trip up to northern Vancouver Island, where we put our boat on a trailer. It's a picture of our boat here with some killer whales. We took it on a ferry from San Juan Island and went over to the mainland. We drove up into British Columbia. We took another ferry to go back over to Vancouver Island. And then we drove all the way up to the top of Vancouver Island to these waters up here called Johnstone Strait and put our boat back in the water. That's where we got to spend some time with these northern resident killer whales. And while they roam all throughout that range map that I showed you on the last slide, this is where they really like to come in the summertime because they can capture some of these salmon that they're feeding on that are returning to the rivers within British Columbia. And I just realized I don't think I selected share sound. So I'm going to stop sharing here and just re-share my screen because sound will be important on our next slide. So we talked about briefly how resident killer whales live in family groups called pods. But one thing that's really different about the northern residents is they're split into 3 different acoustic clans. So the biggest one is called A clan. And you can see that within A clan, there's all these different pods made up of different numbers of whales that are their own separate families, but they all sound similar to one another. And so this is what A clan sounds like. I kind of think of it as sort of the stereotypical killer whale sound. If you've seen a movie like Free Willy, they usually use northern resident calls like this in there for killer whales. The next biggest clan is called G clan. There are 4 pods in G clan, and I'll play a little sound clip for you of these guys. They sound very different. A lot of people think they sound like donkeys. Then the third acoustic clan is called R clan. They're made up of just one pod, but again, their calls that they make to communicate with one another are completely different from the other acoustic clans. And I think they sound kind of like creaky doors. So there's these 3 acoustic clans within the northern resident population. Then they're made up of 15 pods or family groups within those clans. And there's a total of more than 300 individual whales that are all considered northern resident killer whales. And so you can kind of talk about their individual, their family group, their pod, and then their acoustic clan. And even though their calls that they use to communicate with one another are a little bit different, they can still understand each other, and they still make friends with whales from other pods within their own clan and between the different acoustic clans. So especially in the summertime, they like to all come together, and you might see A clan and G clan whales traveling together, and then R clan will come in. So they all mix up and get along with one another. So you might wonder, how do we know which whales we're seeing when we find some of these whales, especially if they overlap in range with southern resident killer whales or Biggs killer whales? You know, how do we know which population we're seeing, and how do we know which individuals they're seeing? Well, thanks to a lot of work by scientists over the previous decades, we basically have these family photo albums of every population of orcas, and they have a picture not of the face like we have in human photo albums, but of the dorsal fin, or the black fin on the back of the whale. And these are unique on every single animal. And so by looking at them closely, we can figure out which specific animals we're seeing. So we look at things like the size of the fin. You can see that an adult male here has a really tall fin. It actually gets up to 5 or 6 feet tall, so probably about as tall as your parents. So the males are really easy to pick out because of those super tall fins. But we also look at the shape of the fin. So here's one that's super curved and pointed at the tip. And so she's a really distinct female that has this kind of sickle-shaped fin. And then it's kind of hard to see, but if you look closely, this whale has a notch in her fin. And so they get nicks and notches just from roughhousing with one another, or interacting with things in their environment. And they sometimes get these permanent markings that help make them unique. And then in addition to the dorsal fin themselves, we look at that gray marking that sits behind the fin called a saddle patch. And those are also different on each whale and on the left and right side of each whale. So this final one I'm pointing at here is an example of what we call a finger, where it's not just a solid saddle patch, but there's almost that finger of gray sticking off the front. And so we look for some of these more unique whales that have the really tall fins, or the notches in the fins, or the distinct saddle patches. And then because we know that they travel in these family groups, we know who else to look for that is probably traveling close by with them. So on this particular slide here, these are A clan whales. They are within the A5 pod, but it's the A42 matriline. And so that means the oldest female is A42 there at the top. She travels with her 5 offspring. They stay with their mom for their entire life. And then she has one grandson that will also travel with the family group. And so as her daughters get older and have more kids, they'll also travel in this same matriline. So imagine living with your mom and your brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles for your entire life. They never move away from home, basically. They're always traveling with one another. So we've gotten to know these whales as families, but we also get to know them as individuals. And everyone is given kind of a scientific number, but also a common name. And so this first one here, it's a big male. We can tell because of that tall fin. His number is A60, meaning that he was the 60th whale that was born into a pod. But then he's been given the name Fife. And he's a 31-year-old male, so fully adult. Orcas can live to be up to 50, 60, 70, 80 years old. So he may have, several decades more to live. But he's one of the bigger whales in the population. He's really well known because he spends a lot of time in that core Johnstone Strait area that I showed you on the map. He's got 3 notches down the back of his fin, so he's really easy to identify. And he's one of people's favorite whales to see because he's so distinct. In the middle here, we have a female. Her name is I-129. That's her scientific number. So she was the 129th whale born into iPod. And her name is Spitfire. And she's 14. She hasn't had her first calf yet. But in this picture, it almost looks like she's traveling with a calf, but she's actually traveling with a Pacific white-sided dolphin. So this is a completely other species of dolphin that lives in the same environment. And sometimes, for reasons that we don't know, they travel together. And the dolphins, the smaller dolphins, almost seem to bow ride on the bigger dolphins or the orcas. And then we have little calves that are born into the population as well. So this is one of the new babies that was born just this year, and we got to meet it when we were up there this summer. It doesn't have a number or a name yet. They usually get those after they've lived for a full year, but its mom's name is A86 Cutter. And so when they're very little and still nursing, they will swim right alongside mom, just like they're shown in this picture here. And they'll stay usually right, side by side with mom like that for the first 1 to 2 years of life. And then they still stay in their family group with mom as they get a little bit older. But sometimes the whales will spread out. They'll be traveling through a channel and looking for fish, and they might not be within visual range of one another in these dark waters. But thanks to those call types that we heard before, they can still hear each other, even if they're miles apart. So they'll, when they're young like this, they'll start learning those call types from their mother, and then they'll use those to keep in touch with their family group as they get older and start wandering a little bit further away from mom. So I talked about how each population of whales has these unique behaviors that are specific to that particular group of orcas. And for northern residents, probably the most incredible one of these behaviors is something that's called beach rubbing. And so this is where they go to these pebble beaches within their range, where it's not like the craggy, rocky shorelines that we see a lot on the coast here in Washington, but they're almost like river rocks that are really smooth and round and small. And the whales will go in and actually rub their bellies and their sides on these rocks on the bottom. And thanks to underwater cameras that have been mounted in some of these special beaches, we can see this behavior without disturbing the whales at all, without being there. And it's a really incredible thing to see. There's some live webcams that are set up at some of these beaches. And you might ask yourself, well, why would they do this? Well, if you think about it, orcas don't have hands, so they can't scratch itches the way we can with our fingernails. They also can't really wrap a blanket around themselves or a coat or do anything else that might feel good on their skin. But by rubbing on the rocks, they probably get to do things like scratch itches or, it just feels good on their skin, just like being tickled does. So this is something that is a really special behavior for northern residents. We don't know why other populations of whales don't do that. Some whales do other things, like the southern residents will swim through kelp beds. That's probably kind of similar because it just feels good. But it's one of the most amazing things about northern resident killer whales that they do this special beach rubbing behavior. And what they do is they'll go in with their family. The whale on the right here, you can see is exhaling. So they actually blow out all of the air that they have in their lungs. That helps them kind of sink down to the bottom so they can rub on those pebbles better. The one on the left, the picture here, you can see the whale's rubbing his belly on the rocks. And in the middle is a photo from up above, looking down at a whole family group going into one of these shallow beaches and rubbing all together. So I hope you'll agree with me that the northern residents are just as exciting to learn about as the southern residents. They're a super cool population that lives just a little bit north of us here. And I'm happy to take some time to answer any questions you might have about these amazing whales.
Thanks so much, Monica.
Thank you, Monica. That was amazing. Does anybody have any questions you'd like to put in the chat? Let me kind of look through here and see. I know there was a lot of really great comments. People were really enjoying it.
We have a hand raised, and then I saw Brooke raise her hand too. If we don't have any chat questions.
All right, well, let's go with Maya. Go ahead and unmute. Let me make sure that you can do that.
Now it works.
There you go.
We're wondering, I have two questions. Why does the R pod stay one pod versus the other ones, one clan, versus other ones split into smaller clans? And why are some of them just two? And while other are mostly a bigger clans?
Yeah, it's a great question. We don't really know kind of the long-term history of why these families are different sizes. And it took researchers quite a while to figure out, you know, the acoustic clans were maybe more obvious at the beginning, but to figure out the pod relationships took a lot longer. And so really just our best guess is that, you know, something about the way that clan whales live, the salmon runs that they depend on, how they travel has helped them to be more successful and grow their population much bigger. Whereas the R clan whales, you know, maybe there's just been fewer reproductive females in the population, and they just haven't grown as big or divided into the smaller groups. But it's a good question, and we don't really know the answer.
Do you have any update on Springer? We followed Springer quite a few years ago.
Yeah, so Springer is a whale from a clan that got separated from her pod when she was a baby and ended up down here in Washington. And they actually were able to bring her back and reintroduce her to our family group. It was an amazing story. And she is thriving. She has 2 calves of her own now. So she's all grown up from having that adventure as a kid. And now she has 2 kids of her own. And I think she might have been seen as pregnant this year as well. So maybe expecting a 3rd one. So she's a great story.
And have you observed the porpoising behavior with the northern residents too, like what the southern residents do?
Porpoising?
Oh no, like how they play with porpoises. We heard from Dr. Giles that the southern ones play with them, and they were still trying to figure out why. Do the northern have the same behavior?
Right. The northern residents do show that playing with porpoise behavior. It doesn't seem to be nearly as common as it is with southern residents, but it's something that's been seen across the 3 clans up there.
And do we have any update on why if we have figured out why they do that?
No, like many things with orcas, we can only speculate and we don't really know for sure. So it might be a type of play for them or some type of training, but we don't know for sure why they do that.
All right, thanks for all those great questions. Before we get to another question, I just wanted to mention, Monica, there was a message in the chat here that I thought you would appreciate coming from Hockey Star, who said that orcas are better in the wild, but the Kraken are better in hockey.
I agree on both counts. Very, very true, Hockey Star.
You have some hockey fans here as well, Hockey Star, so thank you for that. Noah, did you have your hand up in the chat? Yes, all right. You can go ahead and unmute. All right, go ahead with your question. Can you hear us, Noah? Okay, you can go ahead and I think you're unmuted, so you can go ahead and ask your question. No, it doesn't seem to be working.
Oh, he asked in the chat, why do they rub pebbles? We think it just feels good. Like imagine if you go to a really
I
soft
don't know.
sandy beach and you take your shoes off and it feels good on your feet. I think it's the same thing, that the pebbles feel good on their skin.
Okay.
All right, there's another one in chat, and then we'll go to the people with their hands up. How do we know that orcas get itchy if we don't understand what they're saying?
That's true. We don't know for sure if they get itchy. I'm just guessing most mammals seem to have itches sometimes. If you have a dog or a cat, you've probably seen them scratch themselves. And I don't think it would be any different for a whale. They just don't have the hands or the feet or the paws to scratch those itches. So that's just our best guess. We don't know for sure that that's why they rub on the pebbles, but it seems like a good theory.
All right, Logan and William, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Like what? Like why the eyes like so like super small?
Why
are their eyes super small?
They're actually not that small. They look small because the whales are so big, but their eyes are actually a lot bigger than ours. And they have those big eye patches on the side of their head. Those aren't their eyes. Their eyes are kind of hidden in the black right underneath that eye patch. But they're probably, I don't know, maybe about the size of a baseball. So they're actually pretty big.
Yeah, but don't think of them as a kraken's eye, William. That's so big.
Kraken eyes would definitely be bigger. I agree.
They're like the size of a dodgeball, I believe that's what they said in the book. What?
All right, Sierra, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Can female orcas be bigger than males?
Good question. Females are pretty much always smaller than the males. So they're usually about 18 or 20 feet long, and the males are usually more like 25 feet long.
All right, Brooke.
Is spring a good time to see like baby orcas? Like how many orcas would you see in spring? Like around, I think, was it May, I think, or March?
Yeah, they kind of roam in different places at different times of year. So that area, Johnstone Strait off the north side of Vancouver Island, the best months typically to see them up there are July, August, and September. They can come through at other times, but usually they roam either further north or more on the outer coast. So they're not seen nearly as much in the spring as they are in the summer and early fall.
It's kind of depressing because we're going to Vancouver Island next spring, a several-week-long vacay in our trailer.
Well, there could still be lots of other whales around, including the big skiller whales that use that area all throughout the year. And there's always a chance in northern residents too. It's just not the most common time to see them.
Because I want to see orcas and sea wolves, which are actually a thing.
Yeah, that's on my bucket list too. Those are super cool.
All right, so there was also a suggestion from Mariana, who said that her friend Rachel Clark wrote the book Blackfish Prophecy based on the story of Tokate. So if anybody is interested in that, you can check out that book. And the other thing we were kind of wondering as the staff is, did anybody see Ollie? Go ahead and raise your hand if you saw Ollie. Logan and William saw Ollie. I don't think I saw Ollie. Did you see Ollie, Katie?
Uh-oh.
You must have had Ollie really well hidden, Monica.
You did a good job, Monica.
Or I wonder if maybe my little screen, because I had the windows open so that I could see if people were making the Ollie sign, and maybe
I will bring him up. He's on this.
And we'll get to your question in just a moment, Colin.
Oh,
that's good. Good job. All right, now everybody can make the Ollie sign now that you saw Ollie. Good job, everybody. All right, Colin, did you have a question?
Yes, they did. Has anybody heard anything about J-Pod visiting a little bit ago?
Yeah, they were down in Puget Sound just 10 days ago or so, I think. So they've been around not too long ago. And then when they left Puget Sound, they met up with K-Pod and went up north into British Columbia too. Not quite as far up as where the northern residents live, but the last that we heard about them, they were traveling with K-Pod up in British Columbia.
Oh, cool. Quarter, Quartermaster Harbor, right? By Vashon Island.
Yeah, that was super unusual, right? For them to go in there. That's a place that they've
Yeah.
only visited a couple times before, and I think they've never spent that long in there before. So that's another one of those things where unfortunately we just don't have an answer about why they do some of these unusual behaviors, but that was a really cool one.
Yeah.
All right, so let's take 2 more questions and then we want to make sure that we have time for our little activity. So go ahead, Brooke.
Oh, while she's unmuting there, Noah asked, what is K-Pod? That's a good question. So in the southern residents, the ones that live in Washington a little bit more, we have J-Pod, K-Pod, and L-Pod are just the 3 pods that make up the southern residents. So it's 2 of those pods have been traveling together in the last couple weeks.
All right. Now, so one of my other questions was, how big can orcas get? Like maximum length?
Yeah, I think the maximum is about 30 feet or just a little bit over that. And it depends which population, because some of them are a little bit different. So resident killer whales tend to be a little bit smaller than some of the others, but in general, 30 feet is about as long as they can get.
And also, I actually did see the octopus. I just didn't know that was what he looked like.
Good job.
Good spotting.
So last question is in the chat, and Dan said, I was on a kayak trip in Johnstone Strait in July. They were supposed to be there, but weren't. People said that they had not been late like that since 1988. Do you know if they ever showed up?
They did. They showed up on August 14th because I was keeping very close track this year. So just like we've had the southern residents spending some less time in the inland waters around the San Juan Islands in the summer, the northern residents have had a similar pattern where they've been spending a little bit less time in Johnstone Strait. So July this year was one of those weird occasions where they weren't there very much at all, but from mid-August to early September, they had a huge part of the population come in, and including some groups that hadn't come into Johnstone Strait in quite a few years. So they did show up, but they were very late this year.
All right, and then the last comment before we turn it over to Katie was from Bonnie, saying that she agrees that G-Clan does sound like donkeys. So, and I think so too. So, well, one more really good question. So let's go ahead and take one more. Is the northern resident population growing? I think that's a really important one.
Good question. Yes, they are. Their population has been growing steadily for the last 20 years or so. It's not growing quite as fast as it is for the big killer whales, but it does go up by a few whales every year. So I think, I don't quote me on the exact number, but even just a couple decades ago, there was maybe 200 northern residents, and now we're up to over 300 northern residents. So their population is doing a lot better than the southern residents.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Monica. That was incredible. Thank you all so much for all of your great questions and comments. Sounds like you really enjoyed that. I got to learn a lot about the northern residents. So great job, everybody. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie now to play a Kahoot game with us.
Well, hello. You might be able to hear it in the background, but I've got a game started. And hopefully you were paying really good attention so that you can play our Kahoot. So I just put in the chat where you will go. Just copy and paste that into your browser, kahoot.it. And then I will get you our game pen. And actually you can just click right on that link, turns out. And it should take you directly to our game. And you'll have to pick a username. And then once everybody who wants to play is joined, we'll get started. Oh, I see some people coming. All right. And let us know if anybody's having any trouble. You can go ahead and just unmute. I see a couple hands. Yes, the pin. So if you didn't go directly to the link, let me get you the pin. 311. Okay, I put the pin in the chat in case you didn't go to the link and it's asking you for a pin. Okay. This is our game screen. I'll give you one more minute for those who were asking for the pin, and then we'll start the trivia game. I'm liking these usernames. All right, is everybody ready? Cindy, let me know if there's anybody who still is having trouble. Here we go. Okay, I don't see any new ones, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. First question. Resident killer whales are a what of orca? Are an ecotype of orca, a breed of orca, a family of orca, or a fad of orca? Ooh, you guys are already doing well. 8 of you got that one right. Yes, it was ecotype. Resident killer whales are an ecotype of orca. All right, ready for the next question? We've got T137 is at the top of the leaderboard so far. Where can you find the northern resident orca population? Is it Antarctica? Is it Baja, Mexico? Is it Southern California? Or is it British Columbia, Alaska, and Northern Washington? All right, you guys all got that one right. Good work. So we've got our leaders right now are Lil, Ocean Sun, Cleo and Risky Orca and Corbin. Ready for the next question? This one's true or false. Northern resident orcas are fish eaters. Is that true or false? You guys were quick on that one. So it is true, they are fish eaters. All right, so we still got Lil on top, then Cleo, then Corbin. You guys are rocking this. Next question. Northern resident orcas live in three main what? Three main pods, three main clans, three main schools, or three main matrilines? Ooh, this one was a little trickier, wasn't it? Yep, so most of you got it right. It's three main clans. It's confusing though if you've studied the southern residents a lot, because we don't talk about clans as much with them. All right, next. We've still got Lil on top. Nobody's been able to unseat them yet. Then Cleo, then Corbin. Next question. Most northern resident orcas share this unique behavior that involves interacting with their environment. Is it they all wear salmon hats in the fall? They throw kelp at one another? Do they rub their bodies on beach pebbles? Or do they boop noses with sea lions? Oh, you mostly got it right. Yep, they rub their bodies on beach pebbles. All right, so we've got Cleo on top now, then Lil, then Corbin, fighting it out for the top. Next question. Orcas that speak different dialects but share a common language belong together in a what? In a matriline, in a band, in a pod, or in a clan? This one's tricky. All right, guys. Most of you got that one. Oh, Lil's back in top. You guys are really fighting with that top spot. Lil, Cleo, and Corbin at the top with Rainbow coming in. Next question, true or false? Southern resident orcas and northern resident orcas share similar body characteristics. Is that true or false? All right, you're right. It is true. They do share similar body characteristics. All right, still with Lil in the leader, and then Cleo, and then Corbin. Next question. True or false? Northern resident orcas and southern resident orcas often play with each other. Is that true or false? You guys were quick at this one. Yes, you are correct. It is false. They don't interact with each other at all. And now Cleo's back on top. Boy, this is a tight race, guys. Next question. Last question. How many northern resident killer whales are there? This one is tough. Ooh, good guesses. Yes, most of you got that right. Between 250 and 350, or 250 and 350, and I think Monica, it was 332.
Yeah, about 330.
Awesome. Okay, good job, guys. Where did we end? In third place, we've got Corbin. Wow, nice job. And then Lil in second place. And then our winner today is Cleo. Nice job. You guys all rocked that. I can tell that you were all paying attention and that you learned a lot today. Nice work. Was that fun? We haven't done a Kahoot in a while. You guys did really well. All right, well, does anybody have any last questions? Got a thumbs up. Awesome. I want to thank Monica for being here today and putting together an awesome presentation about our northern neighbors. Oh, Hockey Star, would you like to ask a question? I see your hand.
How much pounds do they weigh?
Oh, that's a good question. It depends a lot on the size of the whale, but they weigh, I'd say, probably between 10 and 15,000 pounds on average.
Yeah, it probably depends on how. It probably also depends on how much they're eating a day and also a couple of things.
Yeah, you're exactly right. But when the babies, even when they're born, they already weigh several hundred pounds, right? When they're born. Yeah,
Pretty heavy.
That's very heavy.
They're big babies, aren't they? Awesome. That was a really good question. Well, thank you guys for being awesome participants today and for finding Ollie and for listening so well and having fun with us. Check back next month. We will have our usual holiday whale crafty extravaganza. And then we have some really fun new ideas for 2024 Youth Zoom. So stay tuned. And if you have any other questions, you can always email me, katie@orcanetwork.org. And have a wonderful night.
And go Kraken.
And go Kraken. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Monica. That was fantastic.
Bye, everyone.